In March of 2005, a white van pulled up to a modest, unassuming house located on the Rua 25 de Março in the city of Fortaleza, Brazil. To any observer watching from the street, nothing appeared out of the ordinary as two men stepped out of the vehicle wearing dirty work clothes and boots caked in mud. They proceeded to open the back doors of the van and began the arduous task of unloading equipment, a scene that drew the attention of a neighbor who approached to see what was happening at the property that had been vacant for months. The men offered a plausible explanation, stating that they were establishing a landscaping company called Grama Sintética, which specialized in artificial grass installation. The neighbor appeared satisfied with this answer, expressing that it was good to see the empty house finally being put to use. However, the reality of the situation was entirely different from the neighbor's perception, for the heavy bags of soil were not being unloaded from the van to be used for landscaping. Instead, the men were loading the bags into the van because they were not bringing supplies into the house, but rather taking something out of the earth beneath it. The operation was led by Luis Fernando Ribeiro, a 42-year-old career criminal who possessed a unique set of skills derived from his past employment as a bank security consultant. His history of protecting banks had provided him with an intimate understanding of how they functioned, and he was now applying that knowledge to rob one. Luis had rented this specific property on Rua 25 de Março for one precise reason, which was its location exactly 256 feet from the Central Bank of Brazil in a straight line. For the next 3 months, Luis and his crew planned to dig a tunnel underneath downtown Fortaleza, navigating through layers of clay and rock, bypassing underground water pipes and electrical cables, to burrow straight into the bank's vault. The objective was to steal 164 million reais, which was roughly equivalent to 70 million US dollars in cash. Standing outside the house with shovels and pickaxes, Luis faced the uncertainty of whether the tunnel would collapse, if they would strike a water main and flood the passage, or if someone would notice the strange pattern of 25 men disappearing into a small residential house every night for 3 months. He operated on the knowledge that the vault and the money were waiting at the end of the line, and he banked on the fact that nobody would expect thieves to dig 256 feet through solid ground to reach it. The origins of this audacious plan could be traced back 6 months earlier to September of 2004 in Sao Paulo, where Luis Fernando sat in a bar with 4 other men. While they looked like old friends catching up over beer, they were actually plotting the details of the robbery. The group included an engineer with former subway construction experience who understood tunnels, soil, and stability, as well as a former bank employee who knew the central bank's security layouts, vault locations, and guard schedules. Also present were a locksmith who specialized in high-security systems and a money launderer capable of moving cash without triggering alerts. Luis presented his theory that most bank robberies failed due to time constraints, typically leaving robbers with only 3 to 5 minutes before police arrived, and he proposed a scenario where time was not a factor. When the engineer asked how this was possible, Luis spread a map on the table showing the Fortaleza branch of the Central Bank of Brazil and pointed to a residential street located 2 blocks away from the vault. The engineer studied the map, calculating distances and considering the geology of Fortaleza, which consisted of sandy soil and clay layers. He concluded that the project was possible, though it would be difficult and dangerous, requiring a tunnel roughly 80 meters or 260 feet long and at least 3 meters deep. The work would require digging every night for 3 to 4 months and removing roughly 1 ton of dirt per day. Luis assured the team that alarms would not be triggered because they would not be breaking through doors or walls, but would instead come up through the floor underneath the sensors. When the locksmith inquired about the vault door, which was 4 inches of reinforced steel with a time lock, Luis explained that they would not need to open it because the vault had a weak point. The floor was made of concrete and rebar rather than steel, meaning they could drill through it from below. After considering the risks and the potential payoff, the engineer agreed to the plan, stating that they would need a minimum of 20 more people to serve as diggers, support team members, and lookouts. Within 2 weeks, Luis assembled a total crew of 25 men, each assigned a specific role and promised an equal share of the loot. However, the risk remained that in a crew of 25 people, a single mistake, a loose tongue, or a curious neighbor could cause the entire operation to collapse. By February of 2005, Luis moved to Fortaleza and rented the house on Rua 25 de Março, a small property with 2 bedrooms and a garage. He told the landlord he was starting a landscaping business and needed storage space for equipment, paying 3 months of rent in cash to avoid questions. The crew set up the front, painting a sign that read Grama Sintetica, Professional Landscaping Services, and stocking the garage with rakes, shovels, and bags of artificial grass to make the business look legitimate to neighbors. Inside the house, they removed all furniture from the back bedroom, pulled up the floor tiles, and began the excavation. They immediately faced challenges as the soil proved harder than expected, consisting of clay mixed with rock, which made progress slow and painful. The engineer adjusted the plan, calling for better tools such as pneumatic drills and reinforced shovels, and Luis approved the orders, knowing they could not rush the process without risking a collapse or detection. By the end of the first week, the team had dug down 10 feet to create a vertical shaft and reinforced the walls with wooden beams. The engineer then calculated the exact trajectory for the horizontal tunnel using a compass and maps, marking a path 256 feet northeast straight toward the bank. The digging process involved two men working 4-hour shifts in the tight, claustrophobic space, where one man dug while the other loaded dirt into buckets. These buckets were passed back through the shaft to the house, where another team loaded them into the white van. Every night, the van made trips across Fortaleza to dump the dirt at various locations like construction sites and empty lots to avoid attracting attention. The work was exhausting and dangerous. Carried out in a tunnel barely wide enough for one person, with thin air and walls that constantly threatened to collapse. To prevent cave-ins, they installed wooden supports every few feet to create a frame that held the earth back. They also rigged up a ventilation system using PVC pipes running from the house into the tunnel, with a small electric fan pushing fresh air through, though it barely helped the diggers breathe. By the end of March, the tunnel had reached 100 feet, marking the halfway point. But tensions among the crew began to rise due to fatigue and frustration. Men argued about work distribution and the pace of the digging, prompting Luis to hold a meeting to remind everyone of the $70 million goal, which would result in roughly $2.8 million per person. Motivated by the prospect of life-changing money that would allow them to never work again, the crew refocused and continued digging. As they progressed to 200 feet in April, they encountered a water pipe at the 180-foot mark. Although not a main pipe, it caused water to seep into the tunnel and turn the dirt into mud, forcing the engineer to decide to dig around it by slightly changing the angle. This adjustment added distance, but was deemed safer than risking a pipe break, and they successfully bypassed the obstacle. At 220 feet, they hit underground power lines feeding the city grid, a dangerous situation where cutting the wrong wire could cut power to half of Fortaleza and trigger an investigation. The engineer carefully identified the active cables and rerouted 2 of them, securing them against the tunnel walls where they fortunately held. By late April, the tunnel was nearly complete, stretching 250 feet and sitting just 6 feet from the bank's foundation. The final major hurdle was the bank's basement, as the central bank sat on a concrete foundation 4 feet thick, reinforced with steel rebar. To breach this, the engineer brought in specialized equipment, specifically diamond-tipped drill bits designed for cutting concrete. Because these tools were loud, the plan was to drill during weekend nights when the bank was closed, and ambient city noise would mask the sound. On Saturday, August 6, 2005, at 11 in the evening, the crew gathered for the final preparations. Luis gave last-minute instructions to work carefully and quietly, emphasizing that no mistakes could be made. 4 men entered the tunnel carrying drills, lights, and buckets, crawling through the narrow passage to the point where the dirt met the concrete. The engineer marked the spot directly beneath the vault, and they began drilling, creating a sound that resembled thunder in the confined space. They drilled for 30 minutes, and then stopped to listen for alarms or sirens, but upon hearing no response, they continued. By 2 in the morning, they had drilled through 18 inches of concrete, reaching the halfway point of the foundation. At 4 in the morning, the drill bit finally punched through into open space, allowing cool air to rush into the tunnel. The engineer widened the hole using a chisel and hammer until it was large enough for a person to fit through. By 6 in the morning, one man crawled up into the bank's basement, turned on a flashlight, and found himself surrounded by concrete walls and storage boxes. Directly above him lay a metal grate in the ceiling that led to the vault. He signaled back that they were in position, but they could not proceed yet because the bank would open in a few hours for Saturday business. They needed to wait until Saturday night when the bank closed for the weekend, which would give them 48 hours of uninterrupted access. The crew retreated through the tunnel to the house, where Luis told everyone to rest and eat in preparation for emptying the vault that night. The central bank closed at 8 in the evening on Saturday, August 6th, with security guards locking doors and activating alarm systems. unaware that 25 men were preparing to rob them from beneath the floor. At 10 in the evening, the crew began entering the tunnel in shifts of 5 men, carrying bags, tools, and flashlights. The first team reached the basement, crawled through the hole, and located the metal grate in the ceiling. The grate was bolted down but not alarmed, as security did not expect an intrusion from below, so the crew removed the bolts and lifted it. One man climbed up into the vault room and found himself surrounded by metal shelves stacked with boxes, each filled with bundles of 150 real notes. Confronted with more money than he had ever seen, he signaled the others to climb up, and they began methodically loading the cash into duffel bags. Each bag held roughly 500,000 reais and weighed 25 pounds. They established a human chain to move the money efficiently, with 1 man in the vault, 1 in the basement, and 6 in the tunnel passing the bags along like a conveyor belt back to the house. By midnight, they had successfully removed 50 bags containing roughly $10 million, and by 2 in the morning, the count reached 100 bags totaling $20 million. Despite the cramped tunnel and heavy bags, no one complained after 3 months of digging. By 4 in the morning, 200 bags worth $40 million had been moved, but panic struck one of the men in the tunnel. Overwhelmed by claustrophobia, he dropped his bag and scrambled backward, bumping into a support beam and causing dirt to fall. The engineer shouted for everyone to freeze, and they slowly stabilized the beam to prevent a collapse. The panicked man was allowed to leave the operation, and Luis continued with the remaining 24 men. By 6 in the morning on Sunday, they had removed 300 bags worth $60 million, but with the sun rising and the risk of neighbors spotting the van increasing, Luis decided to pause the operation during daylight hours. The crew retreated to the house, which was now filled with money stacked in every room, on beds, and in closets. The crew returned to the tunnel at 8 in the evening on Sunday, moving faster and with more confidence. By midnight, they had removed another 50 bags, and by 2 in the morning, they were emptying entire shelves, taking bills, coins, and foreign currency. By 4 in the morning, the last bags were removed, bringing the total haul to 164.8 million reais, or roughly $70 million. Standing in the empty vault, the crew was stunned by their success, and although one man suggested leaving a note, Luis insisted on leaving less evidence. They climbed back down, leaving the tunnel entrance open as they needed to remove equipment and erase traces. By 6 in the morning on Monday, the van made its last trip, the tunnel was empty, and the equipment was stowed. Luis instructed the 25 exhausted men to go home, act normal, and not spend money suddenly, promising to divide the cash later once the heat died down. The crew dispersed in small groups, leaving the house on Rua 25 de Março quiet and the central bank unaware of the robbery. When the central bank opened at 7:30 on Monday morning, everything appeared normal until a manager entered the vault at 9 for a routine inventory check and found the shelves completely empty. The bank descended into chaos as guards and police rushed to the scene, initially confused by the lack of broken doors or triggered alarms. A security guard eventually noticed the removed metal grate and the tunnel entrance beneath it. Federal and military police crawled through the 250-foot passage and emerged in the empty house, finding only gardening equipment and the sign for the fake landscaping company. Neighbors confirmed seeing the van and the removal of dirt, but had suspected nothing, leaving police to realize the brilliance of the scheme. However, the perfection of the heist was compromised 3 weeks later when a crew member walked into a car dealership in Fortaleza to buy a brand new Honda Civic. He paid 45,000 reais in cash using a thick envelope of sequential 100 real notes, claiming he had won the lottery. The suspicious salesman called the federal police, who tracked the buyer to 2 other crew members and raided 3 houses, finding stacks of cash still in central bank wrappers. Under interrogation and the offer of a reduced sentence, one of the arrested men broke and identified Luis Fernando as the leader. By September, 8 members had been arrested, but Luis was missing. Knowing the police were closing in, Luis fled across the border to Paraguay in August of 2005, carrying roughly $8 million hidden in luggage and vehicles. He settled in Ciudad del Este, living quietly in a rented apartment, but isolation and boredom led him to call old friends and family in Brazil. Brazilian police monitored the lines, traced the calls, and triangulated his location, allowing Paraguayan police to spot him walking to a cafe in November. Luis was arrested the next morning without resistance, having enjoyed only 4 months of freedom. He was extradited to Brazil and sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. Despite the arrests, police recovered only $8 million of the stolen $70 million, meaning the remaining money vanished. While 13 crew members were arrested, 12 escaped identification and capture, splitting roughly $50 million among themselves.